Hey folks, very happy to sort of virtually see you here today. We're in a new environment. We're doing this live out of a studio rather than my shop. Couple things are different, of course. The time is different, more about that in a second. Charlie Kasorik is here. You've seen him do other lives with me, and why don't you give us a little of your background, Charlie, in addition to doing other lives for GOA?
Well, I mean, I've been, obviously I've been doing woodworking for many, many years. I've got my own YouTube channel, Jack Bench Woodworking. I designed an adjustable height workbench many years ago.
Which is a very cool product. That's the Jack Bench thing.
Yep, the Jack Bench. Yep. So I sell plans for that on my website, and try to stay active in the woodworking community. Go out to conferences when I can and meet people and enjoy myself.
And you do a lot of stuff, more stuff with veneering than I do, right?
Yeah, I like to do veneering, and I do some carving, and I want to get more into more sculptural kind of work. Yeah,
you stay busy.
I do.
Well, what Charlie and I want to talk about today is recess, my favorite topic at school. But no, what we actually want to do is recess hinges into boxes. That's where we're going with this. So a couple things. First off, as always with our live sessions, a big thank you to Typebond for underwriting this, which helps keep things free for you. I'll mention this a couple times over the time we have here, but we've switched times here. It's 11 o'clock in the morning instead of 7 o'clock at night. So why don't you, in the comments, you could give us your take on what you prefer. I mean, I guess if you're watching by default, you're available at 11, right? But let us know, do you like the 11 o'clock or the 7 o'clock p.m. time frame better? And then, I don't know, should we jump?
Sure.
You're first.
Sure.
So give us the 10,000-foot view of what your approach is going to be.
So I've got this box that I made. It's a nice spalted maple box, and I'm going to install the hinges on here. And I prefer these Brusso hinges for a lot of reasons.
Solid brass, right?
They're solid brass. They're machined. They're not stamped. The leaves come together flat without a gap, which makes it nicer to install them. Downside is these are really expensive. These are like $30-35 a pair. But I do like them. And so that's what I'm going to do. And when I install the hinges...
Let's jump for just a second, Charlie. And so
sure.
Then, Nate, you're kind of already there. Can you come in? So when I say, we'll give a little camera direction as we go here just to not confuse the audience. But when Charlie says they lay flat, look at that one. And then the hinge I'm going to use is nowhere near as expensive. This is like a Home Depot hinge. So see the difference there? This is what Charlie's talking about. See the gapicity on this one and how those close. So when I put this one on my box, there's going to be a little standoff there where it doesn't quite close on the hinge end, but Charlie's will get a much better result.
Right. Yeah, and the other option would be if you had this type of hinge, to get it to be even, close flat, you have to make your mortise deeper than you otherwise would. But yeah, that's so I prefer these, but they are pretty expensive for just doing a box. I shouldn't say just doing a box, because boxes are pretty cool. So I like to start doing my mortises on the top, and that's because later on, and we're not going to get to there, but
the bottom of the top.
Well, yes, not the outside, the inside. And I do that because later on, when I do the other half of the other mortise for the bottom, I use double stick tape, and it's just easier to mark it if you start with the top. But we're not going to get there. And so what I'll do is I'll start off and I'll just mark. Well, first thing I did is I marked with pencil hinge side, so when I flip this thing around, I'm not accidentally mortising the wrong side of the box.
And so a couple things about that. And so I think, let's come back to this.
Sure.
Because I think we have a cool gee whiz factor here.
Okay.
Which is, you've got a continuous grain thing going here. Right?
Yes.
In its earlier life, this was one, all the way around, it was a piece of wood.
Correct.
Right? So then Charlie built the box and then went back and cut it. If you want to know just more about just general box making techniques, when you look at the description for this video down at the bottom, Let me jump in here and tell you exactly what it's called. So when I do this, I'm looking at my laptop. We've got a link to build a wooden recipe box. And that's a video just about making a box. And that also covers this technique of making it all,
Right.
integral unit or whatever you want to call it. You
Yeah.
build the whole box and then you go to the table saw. Is that what you do
Right.
yours?
You glue the whole thing up, you glue the whole thing together, and then you've got a sealed box that you can't open. I put it on the table saw, and there's a few techniques when you do that. But anyway, basically, you cut the top off of there, and then you've got
Continuous grain.
continuous grain, which is very cool.
All of that stuff is covered, and you can check that out in the Build a Box video. So that comes back to when Charlie says mark it so he knows where the hinges go, so that he keeps the front, the back, the back.
Right,
so
because
we
otherwise,
maintain that
all that
continuous
extra
grain.
effort to make the grain match, and then all of a sudden, it wouldn't. Although that doesn't look horrible, it still looks better like that.
Cool. All right. Sorry to interrupt.
No,
Back to-
good, thank you.
Back to recess.
So anyway,
Steal that.
like I said, I start with the top and I mark this because sure enough, I would do it on the wrong side otherwise. And the first thing I want to do when I'm doing this is to locate, sideways on here where the hinges are located. Do I want it here? Do I want it here? How far out? And I don't get too fancy with this. I just eyeball it and say, well, what looks good? So that looks good. And I'll take my my square, and I'll loosen my square up. I'll put it there. I say, oh, that looks pretty good there. Move the square up to it, lock my square down, and then I just use an X-Acto knife. I've got a nice handle. This is just an X-Acto knife I use for marking that. So I'll put my turn this around.
I'm going to pull that. We'll bring it back when you need it.
Yeah, so I put my square on here, and I'll just put a little mark there, and I'll do the same thing on the opposite side. Put a mark there.
So a couple of cool lessons out of this. One is using the square gives, and I'm going to do the same thing in a little bit on my setup, gives us uniform relationship to the end of the box. So that's a good trick. Rather than maybe you're like me, I feel like the more times I read a ruler, the more opportunities I have to screw up.
Yep.
So instead of measuring from the end, he's using the head of the square as a registration point, marking from the end. So consistent layout. And then you're not using a pencil, you're using a knife. Why
Right.
is that? And I'm going to do the same thing.
Well, a knife. Well, there's a couple of reasons. First of all, the knife is a thinner line than a pencil, so it's more precise. And the other thing is, when I go to route this out, and whether you're using a router or a chisel or doing it by hand, either way, you have a line in the wood that is a stop point, and it's in carving they call it a stop cut. So when you get up to there, you're not blowing out the wood beyond that point.
It's more distinct than a pencil.
Yes, it's more distinct, and you get a cleaner line.
Let me feed you a couple of preguntas, a couple of questions here.
Sure.
David says, what makes the hinge worth $35 a pair? But I think you kind of talked about that.
Well,
it's
yeah.
solid brass, one thing.
Yes, it's solid
Not brass coated.
I said they're machined, they're not stamped, so it's just a smoother, better operation, and they install nicer.
And there's no play in this hinge. Like some of these less expensive hinges, you can feel there's
Right.
quite a bit of wiggle room in the knuckle,
Yes.
which you don't have. And Brusso, which is
Brusso's high pronounced.
Okay, Brusso just in general is a great quality
Yeah.
hardware company,
Yeah.
and this is just one thing
Yeah.
they make. Okay, then, okay, you're caught up. Hit it.
Okay, all right. So I've got the sides marked on this, and what I'll do is I will mark then the depth, and I use I have this Veritas nice marking gauge, and I just got this. Just so happens I just bought this one. I had a cheaper one of the $6 ones you can get here and there, and the only reason I switched initially is because I dropped the cheap one. I ruined the wheel, and I couldn't find a replacement wheel.
Well, let's hit on this a second, just layer on the box so
Sure.
you can grab it easy and give us a profile.
Yeah.
So one of the things that's worth mentioning, and I'm going to use, ironically, the same tool on my stuff. This is a cutting gauge, not a marking gauge. So the difference is that when you look here, there's a knife-like wheel right there. And it's like talking about using this knife to do the layout lines. That's going to, in size, it's going to cut a line into the surface, where a marking gauge with a spur tends to kind of bounce along, especially when you're going cross grain. This with cross grain cuts and with parallel to the grain cuts is going to give us a much crisper line and just a better quality, a better way to go. So now somebody's going to correct me. Yes, you can sharpen the spur on a marking gauge to give it a more knife-like tip, but it's still not the same as a cutting gauge. This is worth its weight in gold for the quality of layout line that we're about to get.
Right. And what I was going to say too is, with that less expensive one that I used to use, I thought, well, it's the same thing. It's just, no, it's not. This one actually does cut better than the $6 one that I had.
It's the adage, you get what you pay for.
Yeah.
What's always the thing? Cry once and not, I don't know, whatever. Pay a lot of money up front and then you won't be crying your whole life about the crappy tool you bought.
Yeah,
So.
and this particular one has micro adjust on it, which is a nice feature. It's definitely not a must-have feature, but it's a nice feature. So what I'll do though is I want to see how far in this one to set this, and what you're looking for is the center of the knuckle, the center of the pin on the hinge, and so the center of that pin should be centered over the back edge of the box. And so what I'll do is I'll take this gauge and I'll adjust this to there. And if anything, you'd want to err, if you're going to err one way or the other, you'd want to err to have it further out than further in. Because if it's too far in, your box won't open, it'll bind. But you shoot for the center, and that's just what I'll do here.
So what we'll do, Charlie will get it set, and then we'll give you a view of exactly what he's talking about and looking for there.
Okay, that looks good.
Which part of your bifocals are you looking through?
Yeah, exactly. I'm looking over the top, I'm not using them at all.
So so the folks at home can see what you're talking about. Let's give them a shot, wherever we need to position this, like this, and throw your cutting gauge on there so they can see that alignment against that pin.
So if you can see that
I'll give it a little bit of a turn. There we go.
There we go.
Hit it.
So if you can see there, that's where I want that hinge to lay on the back of the box. And so that's where I'm going to mark my my line.
Cool. All right.
Okay? All right.
Proceed according to precedent.
So I actually skipped a little bit here.
Yeah, Mike is telling us buy once, cry once is what Mike
Buy once, cry once. I like that. So I said I do this line first. I lied. I want to have some idea how far to mark this line, because I don't want to
a bullet of scoring lines.
Yeah, I don't want it to go too far, and it's just sloppy, I think. So what I do is, again, with a knife rather than a pencil, is I'll put the knife back into that cut, and then I'll push the hinge up to the knife, and so I know that's exactly
it creates a stop
right up against there. So then, well, let me turn this around so you guys can see. So I put my knife into that cut, and I push the hinge up against it, and then I come on the other side and I'll make another cut.
And then your squaricity here is coming off of having the plate registered off the edge of the box.
Yes.
That's how we know that we're running
Correct.
perpendicular.
Right. I mean, it's pretty easy to see that the edge of the hinge is, flush with the edge of the box.
Yep.
So that's easy to see.
And let me do a commercial timeout. One of the things that I was asked to remind you of, and I forgot, is when you look at your computer screen while you're watching this, in the lower right-hand corner, there's a chat box. If you're fixing to ask us questions, don't use that chat box. That doesn't come here. That's not showing up on my computer. It's going to like customer service or someplace in Never Neverland. So on your screen, right below the video, there's a big blue box. And there are a bunch of comments in there already. At the bottom of that, there's a blank space in which you can type, hit the enter key, and then it posts. So that's what, now if you're watching on YouTube, none of this is happening. You're not seeing any of what I'm talking about. If you're watching on GOA.com, then type your comments in that blank space, hit enter, and then we'll see it. So don't use the chat box lower right, use that blue box. If you're on YouTube, I am toggling back and forth between YouTube and GOA.com to watch for your questions there.
Good to know. Good to know. Okay, so now I've got a mark for each side of that hinge, and I've set my gauge to the depth of the hinge, and I'll just take the wheel and I'll go across here, and I like to make a nice deep cut. Okay, and I don't get it perfect because I didn't have the depth of this perfect. I didn't know exactly how long these lines had to be to begin with. So then I'll come back with my knife and my square. Put my knife back in there because these lines aren't long enough now. And I can see exactly how far that line has to go. And I'll do it again. I'll do the same thing on this side. Do that again. And now, double check, make sure that a good line there, that got a little raggedy. Okay, so now I've got everything is marked. It's pretty hard to see that, I think, on the screen. But
yeah, so the downside, and we run into this on the video stuff all the time, and it's showing up good, pretty good there.
Yeah.
The downside to Charlie and I using marking knives instead of a pencil is it's harder for you folks to see what we're doing. But at the end of the day, this is a much better technique than laying this out with a pencil that starts looking like a crayon line on your work.
Exactly.
And it's very hard to determine where your cut points are.
Exactly.
Let me hit a question on here. How do you cut the top off without leaving a cut mark, Douglas says, and I'm assuming you mean like saw marks. Good quality blade. I use a 40-tooth alternate top bevel when I do this. Do you know what blade you have in the saw? When you're
I'm using a rip blade, a regular rip blade.
Okay, and then you're going to do some cleanup. You're going to have saw marks, and a little bit of sanding on there is what's going to take care of that. And a good way to sand that is lay sandpaper on the top of your table saw as a platen, and then you're going to take this whole lid and just because you want to keep all this in plane. If you hit this with a random orbit sander, it's very likely you're going to round parts over. So you won't not have marks. But with a good blade, you shouldn't have a lot of marks, and sand them using that approach.
Yeah, I use that PSA sandpaper on the table saw all the time.
Pressure sensitive adhesive, not public service announcement.
Correcto. Okay, so a couple of things here to get started. Oh, well, we want to secure this, and George has got this.
Your clampification.
Yeah, George has got this. Well, I'm on this side now instead of that side. So George brought in these really cool armor hinges. I mean, not hinges.
I think that's a clamp.
I think it's a clamp. Anyway,
Go figure.
George brought in these cool armor hinge clamps. No, they're clamps. And boy, these are great. Put them in here and
self-adjusting for pressure.
Self-adjusting, lock it down, and well, that's not a good spot. Move it over a little bit. Still in line for the camera. But
not that we're not promoting or selling any of these products, but
it's nice.
We're doing the work on a Craig Mobile Project Center, which I also find I take this when I teach on the road all the time. It's a very versatile thing to have around. I use it as a bench in my shop quite often, But it's a great portable work surface to have.
Okay, yeah, and like George said, we're not selling these products. I'm just telling you the ones that I like, the ones that I happen to use and I prefer. And
So speaking of products,
yes,
you're about to sort of use a router.
sort of a router.
Talk us through.
Well, what I have,
setup.
what I use
Just
for.
lay it on your box and Nate will grab it.
Okay, all right. So what I have for, that's a better way to, that's good there. So what I have is a Dremel motor, and a lot of times these are handheld. You'll see them, you can buy them pretty much anywhere. They're not terribly expensive. And I use this with a StewMac router base. They make a base that screws right onto the Dremel. And StewMac is a guitar company, Luthier. They sell all sorts of things.
Not Protestant?
Correct.
Luthier? Oh, never mind. That's a different thing.
Luthier. So anyway, so these, I've been using this particular base for years. It's not terribly expensive. You can buy a lot more expensive ones, but this one, I like it. It's accurate, and it's easy to see what you're doing, and so I like this a lot. Adjusting the depth on it is a little cumbersome. I'm not crazy about the way it adjusts, but it's such a dream to actually use this. So for any light recess, these small hinges.
Well, and for guitar work, it's purfling, it's binding,
Yes.
it's I've built some guitars. This would be a handy thing to have.
Yeah, any kind of inlays.
Kind of neat about it is there's nothing wrong with owning a trim router, a flush trim router. I'm not a trim router.
Yeah.
But what's neat about this too, of course, is you can pull the Dremel out of there and you could sharpen your Forstner bits with it. So you can take that same motor and it's pretty versatile,
Right.
To use for other stuff. So
Yeah.
everything you're about to do, you could do with a trim router
Yes.
as well. You wouldn't want to do this probably with a 1.5-horse router. It would just be too big and cumbersome to handle. But
Right, you certainly don't have to buy a dedicated Dremel. I like this, but like George said, you could use a regular 1/4-inch trim router, and that would be fine too. So the next thing I would have to do, though, in this process is to set the depth of the bit on here.
And you're currently unplugified.
I am unplugified.
All right.
Well,
Fixing to be unplugified. Just
Now I'm
double-checking. All
unplugified.
right, that's why we asked.
so this base has a nice, I don't know if it's machined, it looks like a machined anyway, it's nice and flat. And I put this on here and it's not quite flush. It's easy to feel when it's flush, so I'll loosen up the locks and let me see. I guess,
Is your goal to make it perfect?
yes,
Okay.
yeah, that is my goal. I want this to be perfectly flush.
So it's interesting, just if you are interested, Charlie, I'm always interested in this. People are watching from Houston, North Carolina, South Africa, which
South Africa.
is always interesting to me because I lived there for 3 years. I'm scrolling to see if anybody else. Washington, Lake Stevens, Washington. You know, do you remember the show Romper Room? Was that?
Oh,
did you watch
yeah.
that? So
Yeah.
this stuff always reminds me, like, you know, at the end she'd look in the magic mirror and I see David in
Oh, yeah.
Lake Stevens. That's not right. I see Billy in Lake Stevens or whatever. It's
All
a
right.
stupid cultural reference.
Well, yeah.
All right. Anyway.
So now I've got the depth set to the exact thickness of this, the leaves on the hinges. And so another cool thing about this StewMac base is it's got a fitting on here that you can hook a hose up, and they sell, or you can buy it anywhere, I suppose, but they sell, it's actually an aquarium air pump for aerating aquariums. And what it does, you plug it in and it shoots a little puff of air and blows the dust away as you're routing. So otherwise I would constantly be going like that. And with this I shouldn't have to. So this thing doesn't have a switch on it, the pump.
So let's do one thing before you, because we're close to making noise. We're working under studio lights here, which you may or may not have in your shop. You know, so the place is very well lit.
Oh, yeah,
But
let me-
show them your
Yeah,
light setup,
that's
because that's
true.
a need. Because for people who don't have
We have
3 studio lights in
Yeah,
their
we
shop.
happen to be in the studio. The lighting here is outstanding, and I shouldn't
I
have
think
any
we're getting
trouble.
our tans are improving.
But when I'm at home, I've got a setup, and I've got one of these little portable LED lights. I got this on Amazon. It's about, I don't know, $40, something like that, $40-50. And the nice thing about this is it's not tied to a cord. You can get nice LED lamps that are corded, and that's great. But when I'm in my shop in the bench, I'm constantly moving this thing around, back and forth, here and there, repositioning it. And with a cord, it seems like I'm always tripping over it. And so I use this to get good lighting, because it doesn't matter how accurate my lines are. If I can't see them perfectly clearly, then it's a waste.
So a good form of task lighting.
Yeah, good task lighting. It's so important for accuracy.
And this is, you maybe just said this, this one is LED.
Yes.
LED battery operated.
LED battery.
Neat.
Yeah, and then what I do also, I got a lot of tripods in my shop, but I have this tripod here, and I just mounted a piece of plywood on it. And so if I wanted to, because I don't always want my lamp on the bench, sometimes I need it out here. So I'll just take this and I'll set it out here like this, and I'll just turn
Just kick it on
I'll turn
so
it
they
on
can see
quickly.
how bright you
and,
are.
So, well, that blows out the light, but in the camera. But as far as being able to see on the work, it's outstanding. So anyway, that's what I do. So happens in this facility right here, I don't need it. In my shop, I do.
So Ohio, Russia, and South Carolina just joined us in Toronto.
Cool. Well, thank you. Yeah.
Hey, is there a brand name in Tejas, New York, and Nashville? I got to get to Nashville. Is there a brand name on that LED light? Somebody-
I don't know if there is or not. This is called Tac Life, but there's, dozens of them on Amazon.
Google knows.
Yeah, Google knows.
Google LED battery operated light.
Yeah. I just go by the reviews on Amazon. More stars, more likely I'm going to buy it. So anyway, like I was going to say, so I've got this air pump, and so I'll plug that in. And like I mentioned, it doesn't have a switch, so it goes on immediately, starts making noise. And then I'll plug in my my router.
So it's pretty, grab us, Nate, if you would. There's a port here. No, I gotta find just the right.
Yeah.
There it is.
There it is.
That hole is where that air is exhausting out right now. So I like that. That's a pretty neat
It is.
feature to keep your work area clear.
Yeah, it's nice. So, get my eye protection on. And here it is.
And what it looks like an 1/8 inch bit.
This
in there?
is an 1/8 inch, yes. And 1/8 inch is just right for doing these little hinges.
And it's the smaller the cutter, the more better, because then you're going to be able to get closer to the inside corners.
Right.
If we were doing this, I mean, a 1/4 inch bit wouldn't be practical in the Dremel anyway, but if you had a big router bit, just think of the diameter of the cutter, the radius of the cutter. We can only get so close to the corner, you're going to have that much more work to do. We can't get that router bit to cut square corners yet. That technology maybe is coming, but I don't know.
You never know.
So everything's got to get squared off with the chisel after. So smaller bit, better control, and you can get closer to the corners.
Yeah. So, so I will just get started here.
Just give Nate there we go.
Okay.
So Nate, can I talk over this? Can you hear me okay? Okay. So I'll kind of voice over what Charlie's doing here. It's important to understand that what Charlie's doing here is not cutting to the line. He's just trying to do like broad brush cuts here and eliminate, I don't know, 90% of the waste. And the final work to the line is going to get done with a hand chisel. So this is detail work, but it's not uber detail. Like I said, he's not trying to hit right to that score line that he put on the work. How do you feel about that?
Looks pretty good.
So whilst you were speaking, I was saying you're not trying to get to the line. You're going to do that with a chisel.
Correct.
You're leaving some waste there.
Right, correct.
And then it's pretty neat. We can check Charlie's work to some extent by laying the chisel in here. I think that's a hinge, not a chisel.
Yeah.
Laying the hinge in here and seeing if you have flushicity across the top. It wouldn't be a bad idea to do this in a piece of scrap before you come to your, but Charlie's done this 8 billion times. So he set the depth, came to the box.
How'd I do, George?
You did, is perfect okay?
Perfect is okay.
Okay. It would be a good insurance policy to make a similar cut in a piece of scrap. Check this to make sure that your depth is right before you come to your heirloom box.
Yes.
All right.
Yeah.
If you were you, what would you do next?
If I were me, next thing I would do is I would take my chisel and I would clean up these to the line.
Would you like to do
Clean up
that,
the corner.
sir?
How about I do that now?
All right.
And with my eyes, I see better up close without the glasses.
Wow.
And I don't use a mallet or anything for this. I just do it by hand. This is hard maple, but even with hard maple, I can do this without.
You're really just pairing
Yeah,
at this point.
yeah.
You're
It's not very heavy work.
Let me give you a, William says, Dremel also sells a fan blower attachment that fits on the tool, so no tubes, that does a good job of clearing sawdust.
Oh, well, that
Which
would
is-
probably be a good.
okay.
That would be cool. I haven't seen them.
And then John says, why not use a small router plane? Inexpensive, portable, and the mortises would already be done. Small Veritas would be perfect. I don't know, because it's not a right or wrong. It's just this works for you. I'm going to cut with hand chisels, and
Right.
maybe Spagnuolo would do this with a router plane. I don't know. It's just different
Right.
strokes for different folks.
Yeah.
One of the cool things about woodworking, there's 11 billion ways to do everything.
How many?
11 billion.
Wow. Cool.
And all you have to do is read, never mind. So now Maine and Florida have jumped in. Eric
cool.
thinks the air pump is a brilliant idea. So do I. That's pretty neat. So a little, what maybe, if you zoom out just a little, Nate, can you just kind of see Charlie leaning over the chisel like that, if you can back out that much? Because it's just kind of the overall body mechanics here to make this work, I think, are interesting. Because he's not using a chisel. So when he does these,
I am using a chisel.
I mean, he's not using a mallet. He's doing this with an absence of mallets. See how he's getting his body weight over the chisel and just pushing down. And that's why he doesn't have to, use a mallet. And I'm guessing the chisel is sharp.
Yes. Yes. The chisel is sharp. And when I'm pairing, I don't even pair right up to the line initially. I get as close as I can without going to the line because it's easy to go past it.
And somebody asked earlier, no segue from what you just said, are these events archived? And yes, they are. So I asked about the time frame, which led to somebody asking about the archive. All of these lives are archived, and if you go upper left-hand corner at www.goa.com, there's a menu up there. One of the menus is, I'm going to go look to make sure I get it right, videos, WWGOA Live, and everything is archived under that heading. Every live we have ever done, and it's, I don't know, we're in year something, 3, 4 of doing live streams. So we were country before country was cool.
That's us. All right, I'm getting close.
And I'm going to talk about this too. Charlie's cutting bevel down. I'm going to do my work with just a hand chisel. And that the relationship of the bevel of the chisel to the work is an important part of this. Bevel is in toward the waist side when he's doing that plumb, that vertical paring cut. And then when he's trying to just skin waste out of there now, the bevel is down, gives you better control, I think.
And I won't be surprised if when I think I'm done here, that I'm not, and I'll test it, and I might have to make some adjustments with the chisel before I have it completely done.
That whole aspect of putting wood back in, we haven't quite mastered.
No, that's a little.
Better to be conservative on the
Right.
taking it outside.
There are ways to repair. There's always ways to fix it, but that's another event.
And I would say that this is a race that goes to the slow and steady, not the fast, because you just want to, think about how far you are in this box at this point.
Right. Don't screw it up now.
Yeah, you just want to take out a little bit of material, do a check, be patient.
Yeah.
This is something pediatricians would not be good at.
So
They have very little patience.
let me see if
Get it? Get it? Come on, give me a little chortle.
I'm slow, George. I'm really
You're just
slow.
concentrating
And I'm
on
getting
your,
slower.
You're concentrating
All right,
on your
how's
work
this
so
look?
much.
Okay, it's a little tight that way. I think this line, I didn't quite get to this line. I can just see that. It's not even a sliver, but I want a perfect fit. I don't want any slop in there. Let's see how this looks now. Here we go.
Oh, that looks like a nice slip in. Just move your pinkies back a little so Nate, there you go.
Okay, and I'm not quite there on these corners.
So left to right, you're happy.
Yeah,
but,
left to right, but depth, I'm not quite there. I got to clean up a little bit on these ends to get it clean.
And part of what I think is important to watch out for here is you either got to be plumb or slightly undercut this way.
Yes.
Slightly undercut into the box. You want to make sure that the top surface here is meeting the edge of the hinge.
Right.
And you wouldn't want that angle to go the other way where it's hitting the bottom of the recess before it hits the top of the recess.
Yeah, a little undercut on there is not a problem. I mean, you don't want anything drastic, but a little bit is not going to be a problem.
So let me catch up here. Couldn't use a square chisel on a drill press for this procedure. So like a mortise chisel on a drill press wouldn't really give us what we need here. Those work great for doing mortise. Well, they're okay on a drill press for doing mortises. They're better on a mortise machine for doing mortises.
There.
But they're really designed for going deep, not just the little. We're maybe an 1/8 inch deep here, and a mortise chisel wouldn't really be effective for that. John says he would make a jig for a perfect fit, which would sure, if I was doing a bunch of these, I'd maybe make
Sure.
a jig.
Sure.
Well, what I would do is put it on my CNC machine because I like to cheat that way. Or I'd make a jig that a pattern bit could follow, and then that
Actually,
would simplify it.
to that point, Brusso, I think they sell templates for their hinges. So if you wanted to do that, I think they actually sell templates.
Okay.
I've never used them, I've never bought them, but I have seen them on their site.
And on a onesie-twosie basis, I would do this. I would do exactly what Charlie's doing. But if I were doing a lot of boxes, I'd take the time to jig it.
So I'm pretty happy with that. I mean,
Yeah, no, it looks great.
take it off the clamp and see if I can get the camera to
Show your good work.
show my good work. Oh, I cut my finger. All right, and it's not screwed in there, but
But it's not screwed up either.
it's not screwed up. And you see, this is spalted maple, And spalted maple it's hard maple, but it's spalted maple. And so there are some really soft, punky areas. And if you see right here, the wood is a little darker right here. And that was one of the areas that's punky. And so when I drew my line, I got a little bit of a rough cut. And so that's why that isn't absolutely perfect. But I'm quite happy with it.
No, it looks good, and you'll be pleased to know Rico says what a great fit.
Well, thank you, Rico.
So let me revisit a couple things, and then we'll look at chisels on this other box.
Sure.
One, well, if you're wondering why Charlie and I keep doing this, it's because there's a monitor right here.
Yes.
So we need to see what you see so that we know we're getting everything right. That's why we keep looking down. Two, big thank you to Typebond for sponsoring these live events, which keeps them free for you. So thanks, Typebond, for that. Three, if you're watching this on www.goa.com and you want to communicate with us, there's a box in the lower right-hand corner of the screen that says chat. Don't use that. That goes to customer service, and then like Paul Meyer and I get questions. We see those later. We answer those questions. If you want to be communicating with us live on that main screen for www.goa.com, right under the video, there's a big blue box. And at the bottom of that blue box, there's a blank box. And if you type in there and hit the enter key, it'll post your question, and then we'll see it. If you're watching on YouTube, I am toggling back and forth between the tabs to see it. Braxton is watching.
Braxton!
Says, great job, Charlie.
My bud.
Hey, Braxton. How's Viva Las Vegas? We're all going to be there in a week. Are you going this year?
No.
AWFS?
No.
Okay. So let me just look at a couple of questions here and make sure we're caught up, and then I'll bring that stuff up. Chief something says, I enjoyed learning a lot from you, especially proper gluing techniques. So that's cool. Thank you.
Yeah.
Annapolis, Maryland, Joplin, Missouri, something in Cyrillic, or no, what's Russian writing called? I can't read it. Okay, we're
All
set.
right.
Clear
Okay.
the decks. You want to
Clear
swap?
the decks.
All right, so here's my deal.
Stuff out of your
To
way.
provide just a little bit different look, I'm going to do everything with a hand chisel. My box's walnut approach was the same at the starting point, which was this box was made as one big piece, and then went to the table saw, cut the lid off, just like we already talked about. I'm going to move fast on some of this because Charlie has already talked about it, and we have some overlap on our technique. Starting with setting the distance in from the outside. You've already seen Charlie do this. I prefer to do it with a layout tool than a pencil. I'm using a marking knife. Let's hit on this for just a second. I've got two marking knives here. The difference, do you have your,
Square?
I got it.
Yeah.
Nope. The difference between marking knives and a utility knife is when I do this, and this, and this will be like a great challenge, just because it'll be hard to actually see this in detail. The marking knives are beveled one face, flat on the back. A utility blade is beveled both faces. So what Charlie was doing when he used this utility knife was making a point of getting that bevel against the layout tool or against the hinge. With a marking knife, because it's got a flat face, when I do this, it gives me the opportunity to very accurately trace that edge because it's flat on the side. So two marking knives, because you generally need a left and a right. If you look down in the description of the video, we've got a link for more information on the benefits of why we need a left and a right marking knife. However, that being said, layout tool, so things are consistent, trace it, and all the same reasons Charlie talked about, that gives me a nice crisp line rather than doing this with a pencil. Easiest way to find the other side is to get the chisel on here. Now watch, I'm going to switch marking knives because this one's flat on that side. So just like Charlie said, if I put that in the incised line, slide till I kiss it. Now I have to go back to marking knife number 1 because that's flat on the left side. Trace. Now if you want to make this uber simple, one way to do this is to simply fold the hinge onto that edge and trace here. So what Charlie did is he kept that knuckle centered, which would put it in here. Part of this is so that I can do a recess and not go all the way through, because I want to show you how to do a recess. I'm going to fold it, and the whole knuckle is going to be on the outside of the box, like that. And then like this. And when I'm doing this, when I'm tracing like this, my first pass is light, and then I'll push progressively harder once I've got that first path created. Any questions there, Charlie?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Let me see. Michael asked if we could just use a corner chisel, I think he means, and knock those, clean it up like that.
Yeah, so I almost brought a cornering chisel, but the scale of it is way too big
Right.
for what we're doing here. It's
Right.
really designed for hinges. I'm pointing to a door. Hinges on a door, mortising more so than the scale.
Yeah.
And I don't know if they make those at a way, way smaller scale. That
I
would
don't
work for
think
these.
they do, and I prefer using just a straight chisel than a corner chisel. One of the reasons is because corner chisels are kind of hard to sharpen. You got to be pretty good with sharpening. I mean, I can do it, there's no doubt about it. But it's really so easy, and I can get just as accurate with a flat chisel as I could with the corner chisel. And I'm
And part of
happy to do
what predicates the use of the corner chisel is that, again, it's typically a passage door or an entry door, and there are jigs. Porter Cable makes one that are specifically like entry door hinge routing jigs. So when you route that, you're routing to a template, and the length of mortise you've routed and the depth of mortise you've routed are perfect. It's just that you've got round corners instead of square corners. So that squaring chisel can go right up against those cut edges, and you snap it down and you're finished. With Charlie's approach here of doing that freehand route and cutting to the line, you still got to go in there with a chisel because you got to get back to the line, which you would have to do before the corner
true.
chisel went in there anyway.
Yeah.
So it's just in this application, it's not really the right tool for the job.
That's a good point about that
but
corner chisel there.
Mortising hinges on an entry door or passage door it'd be good.
Yep, and Don, New Orleans, says hello. John says Paul Sellers has got a lot of good articles on using a router plane. Yeah, Paul Sellers, he's a great guy. I like his stuff. Nick, RSA, he likes what we're doing here. And Kevin says you can pinch the wings of the hinge in a vise to get them close tighter. Oh, okay, yeah.
That'd be worth-
You
I
could
could-
modify.
I
I
could
suppose
see
you
that.
could. I suppose you could. And quick tip I found from using a marking knife. I think he means he likes what you said.
Oh, okay. Now, depth of cut. What we're going to do is I'm going to use a cutting gauge just like Charlie did because I want to be just like Charlie when I grow up. And I'm setting that to the thickness of the leaf. So cutting wheel on the marking gauge and the cutting gauge, setting that to the thickness of the leaf. Let me get it and then I'll show you again. There we go. That in turn then gets transferred to the box where I had my layout. Now just like Charlie did, I need to know where to stop and where to start. So I'm going to use my square. Then I'm going to get into that incised cut. So as I come along, I can feel right there the marking knife drop into it. Bring the square to that point, just make a little downward stroke. feel the knife drop into that cut. Again, it's another, like Charlie mentioned, it's another benefit of doing this with a marking knife is then you can use that, you can create those stopping points like that. Now, there's 2 lines on there, probably difficult for you to see, but I can see them pretty clearly. I'm gonna drag, it's kind of a drag, and give myself depth. The complete layout then is thickness of the leaf is there, and then the size of the hinge, that rectangle there on the top of the box, or the bottom of the top. All right, a little bit of clampicity. Gonna try to leave this on your side so it's easy for you to see.
So what he was saying, that last Dine Rat, is what he was trying to say about the marking knife is the bevel gets wider the deeper you go, so if you start with the appropriate knife to start the line, then remove the piece and switch to the opposite bevel, you don't create a larger mortise. And that's,
Okay,
yeah.
sure, I'd buy that. Now, here's what I'm gonna do. I am gonna use a mallet.
Okay.
And what I want to do is just give these lines a little bit more definition. And this is where, again, having the cut lines on here, the marking knife lines, see if you can hear this. That little click. When I'm pulling the chisel back, that's the tip of the chisel falling into that marking knife line. That tells me that that's where that chisel needs to go. Bevel is on the waist side, flat is on the keeper side, little rap-a-tap-tap. Finish it to the corner. And you don't want to go crazy with this because we are driving a wedge into this, and if I go deeper than I need to, it's possible that it's pushing the back of the chisel too far into the keeper side.
Similar to the point that Din Rad made.
Yep. And then big long line across the back, so I'm gonna go, I think I have a wider, yep. Gonna go to a wider chisel, let it fall into that cut line.
Beautiful chisels, by the way.
They are very nice. I got these when I started doing guitars. These are Lee Nielsen chisels.
Oh, those are nice.
And there's so much detail work on guitars that you need good chisels for.
Yeah.
Let's just then click on the YouTube tab and see if there's anything there we got to pick up.
Okay. How far were you before? Where's Braxton? Oh yeah, I'm sure it is hot down there, Braxton.
We'll all find out next week.
Sizing is fine. How do you recover if you go a little too deep? That's a good question. If you do a little too deep, then you can fill it in with, I don't know, put a piece of paper in there or a little
bit of veneer.
Preferably, yes. I was going to say a little piece of veneer is probably best. There are always ways that you can repair your mistakes. Well, almost always. It's amazing. With as many mistakes as I've made over the years, I've gotten pretty good at fixing them. So yes, a little piece of veneer under there, a little sliver of something, you can fix it.
I think we're set.
Okay.
All right. With the chisel now, like Charlie, I'm not going to use a mallet, and bevel is down. A little bit of pressure from my thumb. I'm really just whittling, I'm carving, I'm paring away at this. We'll see if the walnut lets me do this without a mallet. And what we want right there, I hit that distinct stopping point, which is the spot where I had tapped the chisel down in there just a little bit deeper. A little overshot. And one of the things I'm doing, see that wiggle of the chisel, not me, is that's helping me kind of walk this forward so that I'm not trying to do a full width pass all at one time. When I do this, and then this, and then this, and then this, that's helping me get that little pairing going. And of course, what we have to do is I'm starting in about the middle and going in this direction. I'm going to try to get that end finished. There. Then at some point, going to get this going this way. So we got to work from the center out. Here, I think I have a little bit sharper chisel now than I had in that bigger one. That's the peel I'm looking for.
Yeah, it looks like it's working a little better.
And this is just going to be a case of kind of rinse and repeat. I'm going to very carefully work. Now see how, fair bit of pressure here, but when I get close to that end, I'm really backing off on my pressure, because if this just goes bloop, I'm going to take a big skin off right there, and I don't want to do that. There, this is what that deeper cut is letting us do. See how that just flakes up right at that stop point. Pressing down pretty good with my left thumb. I'm dominant right hand, stupidly dominant right hand. So I'm pushing on the chisel with my right hand, down pressure with my left thumb. We have a little bit of a recess there, and just frequent checks. We're looking for flush, so I've got a ways to go. Anything?
Just a comment about your wiggling, I think, from Jim, similar to the angled cut you would make for a knife before sawing. Would you advise same for help avoiding the overshoot I just saw?
Use a sharp chisel right from the start would help the overshoot you just saw.
Yes.
I grabbed all of these chisels and thought they were all in good shape, but that one was a little duller than I wanted. It's going way more better with this one. All right, so I'm going to keep doing this, but it's going to get boring because we're just doing more and more and more of the same. What else, Charlie? Any other hinge recess information you want to pass along, or other questions we want to grab?
Well, we got a question here. What type of wood was the bottom of the first box? That was some spalted maple that I was able to find locally here in Minneapolis. And it's beautiful. Really glad that I got some of that.
It was a nice piece.
Yeah. What else could we be talking about? Well, as far as for hinge mortises, one thing I'll mention about those Brusso hinges, and this is I said, we're not trying to sell these, and I'll tell you why. Well, not why, but I'll tell you one thing. As expensive as they are, the screws that they provide with them, I don't like, and I don't use them. I actually go and I buy screws separately to use with those hinges. It blows my mind that they give these uber fabulously high quality hinges, and they give you these cheap Phillips head screws. So
what is it you've run into? Why?
Well, they're smaller. They're have a small shank, and they're Phillips head. And this gets into this gets into some of the ridiculous, really. But the traditional way is to use a slotted head screw for your hardware on boxes. And
why is that? Really?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Oh, absolutely. And if you get into trying to show your work at shows or any competitions, the judges, many of the judges will ding you for using Phillips head screws as opposed to slotted screws.
So they don't own any cordless tools?
Apparently not. Well, it gets even more ridiculous than that. Some of the judges will ding you if the slotted head screws aren't, if you don't clock the screw heads. Which, if you don't know what clocking the screw heads in means, what that means is the direction that the slots on the screws are all perfectly lined in the same direction. So they all be, for example, parallel with the back of the box.
Well, I will confess, when I do electrical work, I make a point of making all of the slots on boxes vertical. When I put when I put cover plates, face plates on electrical boxes. So I guess if they're wrapping you for slotted in Stella Phillips, the fact that the directions aren't all the same is not much of a surprise.
Yeah. So it's just sort of a trivia question for most people, and for a few people, if you're actually out, in competitions, showing your work at exhibitions or shows, yeah, some people really take that seriously.
All right, I'm pretty good on the one end. Tell me what kind of clamp you're using. So this is an Armor, A-R-M-O-R, self-adjusting clamp. And they make a number, and this is their backstop as well, is in the 3/4 dog holes, and the clamp is in the 3/4 dog holes.
I really like these clamps. They're nice.
Well, I did count how many I brought, so if I'm missing any when I leave, I'm going to know. Just, I'm telling you.
Well, whatever you counted was wrong, George. Everybody knows you can't count.
I used my toes. All right.
Fernando in Arizona, he says he's liking what we're doing here.
Good. All right. Why don't you hit back to...
And hi from Phil in the UK. Go back to the other site.
All right. So flush across the top where we want to be.
Yes, it is some nice walnut. Brett
Pipe.
Naples likes that walnut. Are the slots on the old screws narrower than the slots on the new screws? I can't say.
I don't know.
I can't say. Maybe.
Bottom line, that recess is done. I'll flip around, Nate, and then we'll come off of that. I gotta keep a finger on it or it falls out of there. Flush across the top in the recess. Net, what this exercise does is it shows us that you don't have to have a router, you don't have to have the Dremel base. You can do this all with hand tools. In the real world, if I were doing this in my shop, I'd be doing it exactly the same way Charlie just did. I would rough it out with a router, and then I'd come back and finish it with a hand chisel, and that would give me more consistent results. Again, there's 11 billion ways to do stuff, so what works for one person isn't make it imperative for everybody. This is one way to do hinges, this is one way to do hinges, and everybody else has...
Yeah, I mean, some people really like to do things by hand, and I get it. I get it. You got the noise, you got the dust from power tools, and there's a certain satisfaction from doing it by hand, that tactile feeling of doing it. I get it. But like George, I get more consistent, cleaner results using the power tools, and that's my first choice.
All right.
Yeah.
Hit us on the main page one more time.
All right. See how we're
and
doing.
We're about wrapping up here. So if you got any last...
We got it. With the hinge installation, do you lay the hinge on both pieces to line them up, or do you do this freehand also? You're talking about the top and the bottom. What I don't do that freehand. What I would do is I would have, is that square still here? Anyway, I would take the square, the same, so I would...
That you used to lay it out on the first go-round.
So for the bottom of my box, I would take the same square. This happened to be George's, but I would mark the sides the same way as I did to begin with, and I'd put the hinge on and mark the sides again the same way I did on the top. Whoa. Yeah. Two ways of doing it. I'm thinking of different boxes. With a square box like this, I would do it just what I just said. I would mark it the same and I would cut it the same. I've done other boxes that are elliptical or odd shaped, and in that case, it's hard to do it that way. And in that case, I will use double-faced tape, and I'll install the hinge on the one side, and I'll put double-faced tape on it.
And the approximate hinge location, is that what you're doing? You're picking up the
No, I'll do
hinge?
it. No, it's exact. So what I do is, let me get this other side. And you could do it with a square box. I was thinking something different earlier because I just did an elliptical box. But I would actually install the hinges on the top here. I would actually install the hinges, screw them in, and then I would put double-faced tape on the face of them. And then I would line the box up perfectly the way I want it. Press that tape down as hard as I could. And then what I would do is I would very carefully open that box up without disturbing the tape, and I would mark the other side. And like I said, that is if I have an odd-shaped box or something. On a square box like this,
It would work here, but it's not
it would work, but it's
as
not
necessary.
It's not necessary. You can get perfectly great accuracy using your marking tools, your layout tools.
Okay, that's a good, the double-faced tape on the hinge leaf is a great idea.
Yeah, and it works well.
All right.
Let's check the other side here. Back to GOA. I think we're there.
Very good. All right. Well, again, thanks to Titebond for underwriting this and keeping us going. Thanks to you
Hey,
for
thanks for
coming
having
in.
me over
This
here,
was a great
George.
approach, and I
Yeah.
love that little StuMac base. There
They're
might
great.
be one in my future.
Maybe,
yeah, that's a
maybe.
great
Yeah, they're nice.
technique. And thanks to you folks for tuning in. And
Phillips head screws did not exist in the 1930s. Yeah.
How did they build cars at the Ford factory? Oh, they weren't. Never mind. All right.
Go ahead, George.
That's all right. All right. Well, thanks, folks, for tuning in, and we will see you whenever this happens next.
Yeah, thanks a lot.